Grand rising, everyone. Um, Good morning. Shalom, shalom. Peace be unto you all, brother or sister, brothers, if you're watching. You are welcome as well. Today we are continuing the book Earth, Spirit, Serpent. The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. The chapter is titled Earth, Spirit, Serpent Spirals, and Blind Springs. If you would like to purchase the book, it is located in the description. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Ooh. Okay. To all ancient people, the earth was alive, a great animal inhabited by a life spirit or a soul substance. All phenomena were manifestations of this divine force, and after death, all forms returned to this source before passing into another animate existence. The earth spirit was the central transformer of all life energies into the multiplicity of life forms, all protoplasmically connected with each other as in the same body, the same imagination. In the Gaia hypothesis, Earth is defined as a living, breathing, and corresponding body, creating its own atmosphere, filling its own needs, relieving its own stresses. Far from the patriarchal, mechanical model of Earth as a merely passive receiver of stimuli from the sun and sky, this new model shows us an intentional organism exhibiting will and direction, and quite capable of reciprocal relations with all its creatures. In The Pattern of the Past, Guy Underwood tells of his wanderings around Britain in search of ancient roads, animal tracks, stone circles, and other megalithic sites. Underwood, a water dowser, describes the earth force like a magnetic current emitted by underground waters in motion and pressure. This force is affected by the movements of the stars, the moon, and the sun. In turn, it has great penetrative powers and affects the nerve cells of animals and humans. Modern Western science has not yet begun to study this force, but the Russians seem to be on its track, particularly in their studies of water divining. Generated within the earth, this force causes wave motions perpendicular to the earth's surface. It forms spiral patterns, also mazes and labyrinths, and the spiral coils are based on multiples of 7. When manifested in spiral forms, it was seen as a catalyst with the construction of matter and with the generative powers of nature. It was part of the mechanism by which what we call life comes into being. She, the joyous spiral. What Underwood calls primary lines, water lines, aquastats, and track lines were in ancient times considered healing or holy. They have remained stationary since time immemorial. Among the Celts, Helena, the goddess of the ancient tracks, was considered the first and oldest of all deities. Animals follow these tracks and use them to find suitable places to sleep and give birth. Migrations of birds and fish also follow these geodetic magnetic lines, finding their way instinctively over vast distances. Most ancient roads were aligned with these irregular and winding animal paths along the underground force lines. Another system of forces contracts and expands daily, making the earth a breathing animal indeed. Underwood found that some of these secondary lines, along with the geospirals, reverse their positions at each phase of the moon every fortnight. The ancient calendar was lunar, and among the Celts, the months commenced on the sixth day after the first new moon, while the year begun on the sixth day after the first new moon following the vernal equinox. Each month was divided into two fortnightly periods. It would seem that the Celtic calendar was based upon the phenomena of fluctuation in secondary lines, since this provided an exact time once every fortnight in relation to which dates and times for rituals and religious observances could then be fixed. The spiraling force forms an energy network all over the Earth's surface, affecting the germination and growth of trees and plants as well as animals. Here is the practical side of goddess mythology and symbolism. The moon, spirals, earth, water, all related to the right time to plant different kinds of seed according to the moon's phases. Further, the magic earth current is known as the serpent force, or in China, the dragon current. Raising the serpent force is a common and ancient rite among Native Americans, Hindus, Asians, Africans, and the Celts of pagan Europe. These sacred serpentine paths were followed instinctively by the first nomadic tribes. Australian Aborigines make ritual journeys along these current paths in the steps of the gods who created the original divine landscape. They believe that each place the gods stopped became manifest reality, a spiral center of energy. The dragon, the serpent on legs, was everywhere associated with creation and life giving. As Underwood says, the serpent is the one land living vertebrae which naturally and frequently reproduces all the geodetic spiral patterns, and so it seems reasonable to assume that both the serpent and the spiral are representations of the geodetic spiral. And serpents and spirals were always associated with the goddess. Eileithyia, Cretan goddess of childbirth, was always accompanied by snakes. The umbilical cord is itself a serpentine connection between the mother and new life. The mythic relation between serpents and earth water is also ancient. Sacred pools and underground springs were always legendary, guarded by magic snakes. A blind spring is a spot from which a number of underground streams flow, forming a radiating pattern of energy. Underwood noted that cows will break out of a field to reach a blind spring and give birth to their young there. This is true of all animal mothers. Perhaps the spiral energy patterns found over blind springs can ease labor and produce healthier offspring. Doubtless, ancient women also sought out the blind spring as a place for childbirth, according to Eric Newman in The Great Mother. The earliest sacred precinct of the primordial age was probably that in which the woman gave birth. It is the place where the great goddess rules and from which, as still in later female mysteries, all males are excluded. Not only is the place of childbirth the sacral place in female life in early cultures, obviously it also stands at the center of all cults that are dedicated to the Great Mother as the goddess of fertility. The mysterious occurrence of menstruation and pregnancy and the dangerous episode of childbearing make it necessary for the inexperienced women to be initiated by those who are informed in the matters. This precinct is the natural, social, and psychological center of the female group, ruled over by the older women, the older experienced women. The blind spring was the esoteric center of the old religion as well as being the physical center of its monuments. It was holy, healing ground, a place of harmonious power where the goddess dwelt. Blind springs were to be found at the center of every prehistoric temple, as well as every medieval church in Britain and Europe, according to Underwood. Gates of cities and temples were also set over blind springs, giving divine protection to those entering and leaving. Holy, healing, and oracular wells were sunk on blind springs, and the most ancient cities of the Near East, such as Jericho and Catalhoyuk, were built over such sacred wells. The subterranean well water was medicinal for a short season each year when the animated spirit traveled through like an electrical current. Stones placed nearby probably served as storage batteries for its magnetic energies. The ancient idea of divine protective sanctity was expressed by encirclement. Monuments were enclosed by protective underground spirals, mirrored above ground in the foundation maze or labyrinth. All burial places were surrounded by underground streams. In mythology and fairy tale, all magic castles are surrounded by a circular moat or a rushing stream, and no magic rite can safely occur unless first a protective circle is drawn around it and the participants. There is a general association of important prehistoric sites, geodetic lines, and underground water. Guy Underwood was a water diviner. This art, along with geodesy, measurement of the Earth's surface, was part of the training of Celtic Druids. It was also practiced by the Scythian Enirs, who were legendary hermaphrodites. They wore women's clothes and received their gifts of divination from Aphrodite. The Druids prophesied with the aid of willow wands, a tree sacred to the moon goddess, the Enirs with a wand made from yew or mountain ash, trees sacred to the death goddess. Both willow and yew are used in water divining. St. Non's Well in Brides Bay, Pembrokeshire, South Wales, Cymru, Stew Collection, 1981. John Michel in The Earth Spirit theorizes that a stream of life-giving magnetic current passes through the land once a year, following certain paths, the season determined by positions of the stars. Legendary, this super energy transit was described as the God passing through. Sacred calendars related to local topography and myths and customs were based on a once unified system of awareness of the pathways of the Earth Spirit. Worldwide, the sacred energy pathways were marked by some human means, mounds, banks, ditches, dolmens, menhirs, and stone crosses, stone circles, terraces, and roads. In some places, the energy circuits were known as fairy paths. Roads of psychic activity and local peasant celebrations were timed to coincide with the current's passage. Processional and holy ways were located along raised serpent paths. Stone avenues representing the serpent lead up to Stonehenge, which is an ancient temple of the moon and the serpent. As Michelle describes it, the mercurial earth current glides toward it like a serpent toward an egg, moving through the earth's crust. All stones in such monuments are believed to have strong healing powers, the rocks and boulders acting as vessels of the vital spirit. St. Non's Well, 1981. In all ceremonies, the goddess was seen to approach her shrine by a particular route. She both followed and made the energy path. Once she was accompanied by her nomadic celebrants. With permanent settlements and agriculture, these sacred journeys were imitated in religious processions. All these ceremonies were intended to energize and harmonize the people, as together they followed the path of the earth's magic life flow. And this is the real difference between ancient science and modern. Modern technologies tend to cut across the lines of the earth force, arbitrarily and unconsciously separating human activities from the energy radiations of the earth, and so setting humans and earth against each other in a force field of antagonistic vibrations. The old science and technology found ways to locate and tap the earth's natural force flow, integrating human and earth energies through ritual in a strong, harmonious field. New Grange Burial Mound. Colorado, Meath, oh, I don't know. Code Meath, Ireland, 1978. Corn Mother at Newgrange, 1981. Celebrating Ancient Celtic Wales, Cymru, 1984. The operating principle of the ancient beliefs was the analogy between macrocosm and microcosm. What was true of the earth body was also true of the bodies of all creatures on earth. And so, analogous with the ancient science of geomancy is another ancient technique, acupuncture. As Michelet writes, Chinese acupuncture treats the human body by regulating the currents of vital energy that flow through the skin, as the geomancer treats the body of the earth. Kirlian photography has shown us that all the ancient acupuncture points are identical with points of great energy explosion on the skin's surface. We will find ways to take Kirlian photos of the whole earth body, the globe's etheric body, and perhaps learn again to follow the energy charged serpent paths to the benefit of all life. It is cosmos to those who know the way, and chaos to those who lose it. Underground caverns and alchemic mysteries. The power and effectiveness of shamans, witches, sibyls, druids emerges from their ability to communicate with the non human, extraterrestrial, and subterranean forces, and the spirit world of the dead. The megalithic chambers of Malta and Gozo were places of such communication. And in Britain, also, there are rumored to be subterranean caverns, chambers of initiation, and incantation under Stonehenge, Glastonbury Tor, and other stone monuments. Underground chambers called fogues or souterrains are often found within enclosures of ancient villages in the western parts of Britain, and especially in Ireland. There is much speculation about their purpose. Three-dimensional underground mazes called weems were built by the ancient Picts of Scotland. The word weem relates to the word wamba or cave, and also wami, womb. The Old English word for womb is wamb. The mysterious Tuatha De Danann, children of the goddess Danu, knew all the magical arts, which they brought to Ireland. Driven underground by later Celtic invasions, they are still believed to dwell in earth mounds and are the Irish fairies who serve as communicators of energy between the mortal and invisible worlds. All prehistoric monuments in Britain and globally are associated with the cult of the dead, a very exact ancient science of spiritual invocation and conscious direction of natural forces. The Irish fairy realm is the other world of the Mexican Nogul, the dream time of Australian Aborigines, the summerland of the immortal dead who live on in other dimensions of our total reality. It is the potentia of all possible energy and form. The Tuatha De Danann were also called as Sidhe. Sidhe, pronounced she, is a Gaelic word meaning fairy mound or realm of the magical powers, and it no doubt corresponds to the Hindu-yogic term Sidhu, which also means magical or occult powers. Far from being crude and carnal, as Christianity has labeled paganism, the sacred mysteries of antiquity were of a subtle psychic nature, introducing initiates into the invisible world by means of heightened consciousness. In these rites, the human psyche experienced physical death and the transcendent state of future being. The mysteries were enacted in underground chambers from which all light was excluded, built to focus the earth's powerful energies on the chamber and its occupants. Behind this animated current is the mystery hinted at in the catacombs of Ulysses. that may not fully be comprehended within the natural limits of human experience. As the child is conceived within the mother's womb, so is the spirit conceived within the subterranean depths. Recent experiments conducted in caves suggest that conditions for ESP, telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance are more favorable in an underground environment. Perhaps the moist earth, wholly surrounded such caverns, dampens the electromagnetic radiation with which the brain is normally bombarded, allowing the psyche to receive other transdimensional radiations. At any rate, as John Michel writes, the oldest branch of alchemy was concerned to bring out the earthly paradise through the fruitful union of cosmic and terrestrial forces. Alchemy, geomancy, astrology were originally united in a system that recognized correspondences between planetary influences and the spirits of the earth's metals. Alchemy was a major continuation of the ancient mysteries and their symbols. The dragon in alchemy represents the flame of spirit, and the dragon's fiery breath signifies transmutation of matter through intense heat. The philosopher's stone was the mystic condition through which all things could be transformed. All modern chemistry has its roots in both practical and philosophical alchemy. Some kind of atomic theory was known to the ancients who, working always by analogy, believed in total correspondence between material and psychic processes and thus their mutual influence and interaction. In Egypt, as late as Roman rule there, many of the renowned inventions within the science of alchemy were created by women. Maria the Jewess, in particular, circa 1st century BC, invented practical instruments for laboratory research, including the alchemical steel. She is credited with improving all the essential appliances that would be necessary to alchemical and chemical research for the following 2,000 years. What we have left of alchemy, in addition to modern chemistry, are its symbols of psychic death, change, and rebirth through the process of alternating fusion and dissolution of opposite elements. This is a psychic rite, an earth spirit ritual, retaining much of the ancient goddess mysteries in distilled form within each individual psyche. The tarot cards also retain a pictorial record of these ancient rites of transformation and their process symbols. The goddess at Avebury in Britain. Avebury on the Wiltshire Downs in the south of England was the sacred center of megalithic culture in Britain. Avebury's stone circle is the largest yet found in England. It dwarfs Stonehenge. There are 77 other stone circles or hinges dating from the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age. Avebury was built by pre-Celtic people living in a farming community circa 2600 BC. For thousands of years before its construction, the entire landscape of the surrounding area, stretching for about 37 miles, had been seen as the outline of the body of the goddess. Every hill, mound, stone, and long barrow was believed to form part of her maternal body. The three stone circles at the Causewayed Camp at Windmill Hill nearby predated Avebury by more than 600 years. The Avebury monuments, which include Silbury Hill and West Kennet Long Barrow, form a condensed sequence of visual sculpted images within the center of the larger and more ancient presence. They express together journeys of cosmic range and the entire yearly agricultural cycle within the space of 3 fields. The monuments are aligned within the pubic triangle of 2 rivers meeting. These rivers were seen as superhuman bloodstreams gushing from the earth womb of the goddess. Here, every year anew, the goddess was born, grew into maiden and lover, became mother, and finally the old hag of death. The temples were her seasonal reality, and the people moved with her from place to place in rhythm with the changing farming year. Our solar year is divided by solstices and equinoxes. but in the ritual calendar, and the quarter days in between were used as the major days and nights of celebration. To the ancients, the lunar and solar manifestations of these days were equally important. The celebration nights fall in early August, November, February, and May on the appropriate lunar phase nearest to the solar quarter day. These are the witches' Sabbats of Lammas, Samhain, Imbolc, and Beltane. At the August or summer and February winter quarter days or nights, the moon and sun rose and set in alignment with the axis, joining the two sacred springs at Avebury. Avebury Stone Goddess, 1978. Avebury's circle originally had 98 stones, some up to 18 feet high, enclosing an area of 28 and a half acres. Two smaller circles stand within the larger outer one. The earthworks surrounding the horseshoe or circular space are bounded by a ditch with a bank beyond. Using only red deer antler picks and shovels made of ox shoulder blades, the people raised the earth bank nearly 50 feet above the ditch bottom, stretching almost a mile in circumference. Two serpentine stone avenues led into the circle. They were 1.5 miles long, 50 feet wide, and were defined by 100 pairs of stones set at intervals of 80 feet. In shape, the stones were broad-hipped and long forms of the goddess, alive and powerful in her stance. The Christian church began its long fight against the Avebury stones in 634, smashing them or exorcising them with the sign of the cross. Both inner circles were destroyed sometime after 1700, and many of the other stones were demolished or simply buried. This was at the height of the witch hunts, and these ritual stones of the goddess, just like her priestesses, the witches, were actually tortured and exorcised by Christian priests. The stones were burnt, chipped, mutilated. The institution of private property finally brought about the end of the sacred stones with the enclosure of common land by private wealthy farmers. The emergence of the landless proletariat and the modern notion of individual progress at the expense of the community fittingly coincided with the fall of the Great Mother at Avebury. Of the original stones in West Kennett Avenue, 72 were left in 1722. By 1934, only 4 were still standing, with 9 left fallen. In 1937, a Scots industrialist bought up the land, restored the ditch and earthworks, which had been serving as a rubbish dump, and dug up and reinstalled 43 of the buried megaliths. The long Avebury avenues represented the bisexual snake dragon goddess, female and male in one. The West Kennett Avenue originated at the Serpent's tail end from the sanctuary, once a circular temple labyrinth of complex timber structures covered with a conical roof. This might have been the puberty temple where young women of the community were initiated into the mysteries of farming, sexuality, and childbirth in the springtime season of plowing in preparation of the seed bed. The young women re-entered her womb within the sanctuary, which is Silbury Hill, at a different season. Here, the goddess is the hibernating spring quarter serpent, just reawakening from her long winter death or sleep. On February 1st at Imbolc, the Feast of Lights was celebrated. Torches carried processionally in the night to help the goddess return from the underworld and to be reborn again. At the tail end of Beckhampton Stone Avenue, with its more phallic-shaped stones, was the male counterpart to the sanctuary, doubtless a temple for male initiation. Avebury Circle is where the young men and men met after dancing and winding their way up the avenues in imitation of the serpent at midnight of the waxing moon of the May quarter day. This stone circle forms both an enlarged cunt and a great head, the inner circles forming the lunar and solar eyes. It is also a world island surrounded by the cosmic ocean, and its hidden power and secret is the sacred underground water that seeps into the ditch in the spring. Here, the unborn fetuses dwell. Avebury Henge was the goddess of love incarnate, the proper place of conception. Here was celebrated the communal yearly May festival wedding in orgiastic rites, the entire community dancing with upraised arms on the outer banks in imitation of the horned new moon. This was Beltane. The maiden becomes a mother, and so the next stage of the cycle was centered at Sealberry Hill, the pregnant womb of the goddess or the creation cone. Here, as already described, the people gathered on the summit on the night of the full moon at Lammas, the August quarter day or night, to watch the harvest child being born. With oncoming winter, the goddess becomes the lady of the tombs, the hag of death, the mother of the dead. Her dwelling is now at West Kennet Long Barrow, where she retreats into the underworld after Samhain or Hollow Mass. Excuse me. This barrow is 340 feet long and shaped in her gigantic image. The image of the Sealberry mother is repeated within the chambers that represent vagina, birth passage, and uterus. But here is made hollow to receive the dead who were buried within her in fetal position. The 30 chamber stones of West Kennet might form a lunar monthly count. There is no water associated with this barrow, no spring, no stream. All is dryness and barrenness. There are only rivers of stone. West Kennet Long Barrow was built in 3500 BC. It is a Stone Age horned grave, tomb, womb, temple, and it is older than Avebury and Sealberry Hill. The people were buried within it collectively without distinction of class or hierarchy. It was ritually frequented by the living as well as by the dead. Megalithic culture is far older than once supposed. Traces of a megalithic farming community have been found in County Tyrone, Ireland, dating from 4500 BC. Patriarchal Bronze Age culture was first brought to Britain circa 2000 BC by the taller, warlike, and aggressive Beaker people. In 2600 BC, the entrance to the West Kennet Long Barrow was sealed off with huge megaliths or great stones. These stones formed the body of an ox. The goddess was moon and ox, one and bisexual. She is the ox lady. She emerges miraculously out of death through the sacred bull. There was continued veneration of the tomb during late Neolithic culture. On Samhain in November, the winter quarter day, a winter eve ox was sacrificed here on the night of the no moon. The ox was ridden by the queen of death, and this ox is miraculously reborn with the spring. The winter goddess lived on in folk memory as Black Annis. She was remembered as a great mountain builder and was a gigantic hag. There are also sacred hills in Ireland named for her, the Paps of Anu or Anu's breast. Pervading all the earthworks and stoneworks of Avebury was the desire to be close to the earth. The people drew strength from her in birth, in life, and in death. The monuments could clearly not have been built with slave labor, but were the love labor of farmers, women, and men who were in tune with great psychic physical powers. To carry through such a task, they lived a peaceful existence. Perhaps natural magic energy was released from the earth and used on an everyday basis by the people. Ancient myths of the dragon serpent guarding a mysterious and symbolic treasure perhaps refer to lost secrets of crop fertility, a hidden power running in fertility currents throughout the countryside. The story goes that anyone who tastes the dragon's blood becomes at one with nature and forever understands the songs of birds. Mother gushing from the earth at sacred wells. This photo is the goddess at Avebury and Silbury, 1978. The ancients knew that some wells and stones, drunk or touched or embraced in a certain way and at certain times of the year, could regenerate and revitalize people and animals. Sacred stones seem to contain and emit a force that periodically waxes and wanes. Beneath each active standing stone, there appears to be a crossing of underground water streams. The movement of water through a tunnel of earth, particularly through clay soil, creates a small electric field for which the stone acts as an amplifier. When this energy or power emerges from the ground, it does so in the form of a spiral ascending in 7 coils, the lowest two beneath the ground. This is not a stable phenomenon, but waxes and wanes, changing polarity every month. After waning, it dies away for a few days and then waxes in the opposite direction. It cyclically increases and decreases until the end of the lunar phase. The study of the moon's orbit was essential to megalith builders, the people of the moon, the stones, and the serpent goddess. The stones might also have functioned as a means of communication over long distances, since the magnetic force that activates the stones also links them in a continuous chain of vibrations. The ley lines, paths for the force, interlock in a cobweb of stones, circles, mounds, and barrels all over the earth. But the stone circles would not have been fully activated unless the calendrical events were accompanied by human rituals and dance, sometimes sacrifice, which focused the forces and fixed them in the stones. Fire, like water, was essential to the workings of the monuments and their hidden power. At May Day or night was the moment when Beltane fires were lit from hilltop to hilltop to celebrate the coming of the new moon. On May Day, the people drank from the sacred well and circled it 9 times. The May Day sunrise links Avebury in a direct line with Glastonbury Tor, some 40 miles away. Glastonbury looks as human-made as Silbury Hill, but it was actually shaped by volcanic rock violently thrown into the sky in an otherwise flat and marshy land. Glastonbury's spiral path, however, was molded by human hands. It is a three-dimensional labyrinth rising up the Tor in 7 circuits. Nearby is Sacred Chalice Well, anciently called Blood Well, because of its miraculously healing red-stained waters. Not far from Glastonbury is Wookie Hole, an ancient cave where the rites of the winter/death goddess were probably enacted. According to the myth, in this cave lived a terrible and bloodthirsty witch who demanded human sacrifice. She was supposedly finally exorcised by a Christian monk from Glastonbury. The persistent British myth of the slumbering giant Albion and the return of King Arthur and the Golden Age is really the legend of the reemergence of the goddess and her people, the great mother and cosmic harmony we lost with Avebury. Today we live truly in the mythic wasteland of patriarchy, awaiting her rebirth and return with the spring of reemerging women cultures. Moontime, the great intellectual triumph of women's culture. To interpret the flow of terrestrial magnetism, the dragon current, the serpent path, it is also necessary to watch the night sky. Night, to ancient people, was not an absence of light or a negative darkness, but a powerful source of energy and inspiration. At night, Cosmos reveals herself in her vastness. The earth opens to moisture and germination under moonlight, and the magnetic serpentine current stirs itself in the underground waters, just as the thick, snaky spray of stars, the Milky Way, winds across the night sky. Moon phases are a part of the great cosmic dance in which everything participates. The movement of the celestial bodies, the pulse of tides, the circulation of blood and sap in animals and plants, Observation of the night sky, of the stars, and especially of the moon was the beginning of mathematics and science. Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain, 16 miles south of Silbury Hill, does not exist in isolation. Its structure also represents a seasonal and human life cycle. It was probably the center or head of an earlier, much larger configuration of long barrows that together portrayed the squatting goddess. The Avebury monuments and Stonehenge, taken together, as Michael Dames says, may have been arranged to share and perfect the celestial environment just as they share the River Avon. Stonehenge was elaborated over a long period of generations and was built many times. Stonehenge the first, circa 2750 BC, is contemporary with Silbury. It consists of the earthworks of the Outer Banks and the 56 Aubrey holes. Its 4 station posts are in lunar and solar alignments. The latitude of Stonehenge is practically optimum for moon-sun rectangular alignment. The Midsummer Sunrise stones in West Kennet Avenue at Avebury and the Heel Stone at Stonehenge were both erected circa 2600 BC. The foundation of the Aubrey holes was to predict lunar eclipses. It is infinitely more difficult to study the orbit of the moon than that of the earth around the sun. The moon describes an arc around the earth that varies from month to month. The arc is slightly tilted in such a way that over a period of 18.6 years, the moon first rises and sets very far in the north and south, and then it gradually moves its rising and setting points further inwards from these extreme positions. After 9.3 years, it begins to move back again, retracing its steps. We now know that the megalithic stone circles of England and Brittany were, among other things, giant observatories. Running its dimensions through computers, modern astronomers have confirmed that Stonehenge was used to calculate the solstices, equinoxes, and future eclipses of sun and moon. Some have called it a solar temple, but the major concern of the megalith builders seemed to have been precise observation of the moon. The moon's eclipse cycle is measured by a period of 18.61 years. The 56 Aubrey holes are set to mark this cycle over a period of time, 19 plus 19 plus 18 years. More remarkable, many of the stone circles and alignments throughout Britain were built to calculate precisely the slightly periodic 9-foot oscillation of the moon. Its wobble of amplitude 9 feet or 0.15 degrees. The period of this tiny wobble is 173.31 days, or half an eclipse year. Such accurate knowledge of this small lunar oscillation, familiar to Neolithic moon people, was lost to the Western world and not rediscovered until Tycho Brahe's observations in the 16th century. The moon's wobble was known and accurately measured by ancient Arabic astronomers whose traditional knowledge was not destroyed by Christian book burnings, library razings, and persecutions of intelligence. The Mayans observed it also. At this point, let's quote Pliny, a writer of the 1st century AD. True it is, I confess, that the invention of the ephemerides to foreknow thereby not only the day and night with the eclipses of sun and moon, but also the very hours is ancient. Howbeit, the most part of the common people have been and are of this opinion, received by tradition from their forefathers, that all the same is done by enchantments, and that by the means of some sorceries and herbs together, both sun and moon may be charmed, and enforced both to lose and recover their light. To do which feat, women are thought to be more skillful and meet than men. And to say a truth, what a number of fabulous miracles are reported to have been wrought by Medea, queen of Colchis, and other women, and especially by Circe, our famous witch here in Italy, who for her singular skill that way was canonized a goddess. The charming of sun and moon to lose and recover their light refers, of course, to eclipses. and apparently the knowledge needed to predict them, including the ephemeris tables, originated with women and with a female cosmology dating far back into the Stone Age. The chalk bands of Stonehenge Avenue meander for nearly 2 miles from the river Avon to the Henge. There were even an enclosure nearby, very much like the Avebury Sanctuary. It is called Woodhenge, and its egg-shaped ring has 5 concentric circles. At Stonehenge, the first in the concentric circles of ditch, bank, and Aubrey holes, the image of the eye goddess was created. At Stonehenge, the second, 2000 BC to 1800 BC, the station posts are still standing. A half circle of U-shaped or vulva-shaped design was created with precious blue stones brought from the Preseli Mountains in Wales, more than 100 miles away. That part of Wales was itself an ancient sacred center of the Celtic goddess Ceridwen, abounding with stone circles. The blue stones are about 6 to 8 feet high, delicately colored and finely shaped. Nearby stands Pentry Han, the large gateway cromlech anciently called the womb of Ceridwen by the Druids. Originally covered by an egg-shaped earth mound, it was a dark interior space where Druids practiced initiation rites. Stonehenge is precisely positioned so that the distant hills align astronomically with the great stone arches. It was built to keep the rhythm of the agricultural year in synchronization with the movements of the astronomical year. Even in historic times, according to Michael Dames, the stones were still related to the wheat harvest. In folk memory and custom, the stones could be counted correctly only by laying a loaf of bread beside each stone. The 30 upright stones of the Sarsen circle probably represented the 29 and a half days of the lunar month, with the smallest stone, 2, as the half day. In the final version of Stonehenge, built by the Beaker people, the blue stones were repositioned. The new feature is the unique use of stone lintels. Perhaps at this point, the alignment was turned more specifically into the solar temple that most male historians and writers so urgently want to find there. But even from this later Beaker period, goddess carvings are found on the stones. It is possible that the elevation created by the later trilithons was trodden at the first fruits ceremony, people climbing up by ladders or scaffolding. What appears to be a libation bowl carved with goddess eyes is sunk into the upper surface of the great trilithon lintel. Stonehenge is very majestic but harsh and gloomy. Avebury is open, deeply maternal and feeling, and the heart of a beautiful rolling countryside, which is presumably why Avebury was condemned to oblivion for centuries until rescued in the 1930s. And there was no thorough written account of Avebury between 1743 and 1977. Stonehenge, as soon as it was described as a solar temple, took all the attention and later became particularly popular as a Druid temple. The megalithic stone circles were used for most delicate lunar observations. Alexander Thom, a British civil engineer who measured hundreds of megalithic sites, believes that all the impressive alignments in Britain were lunar. The geometry of the stone circles is derived from the extreme positions of the moon, stars, and sun as they cross the horizon. In particular, the moon could be measured against a distant hill slope, with all the lunar backsites marked by the tallest stones. The great 60-foot menhir named near Carnac in Brittany, the Breton coast of northwest France, when viewed from other megalithic sites, acted as a marker of extreme positions in the moon's orbit. And this lunar observatory stone dates from 4,000 years ago. Shaman/goddess at Callanish, 1982, stone circle on the Hebrides of the northwest coast of Scotland. Lunar sites, according to Thorne, were often built in very remote and inaccessible places, particularly along the wild coast of Britain and France and in northern Scotland. Night after night, the ancients used foresights on the great horizon circle to calculate a curve on the ground, marking positions with stakes or rods. Stepping back each night, the curve obtained on the ground is, to a smaller scale, a graph of the moon's declination plotted on a time base. Thorne notes that the megalithic people were mariners, traveling the seas to the far ends of the Scottish Isles and further. Sailors in those dangerous waters needed some means of predicting tides. Knowing from lunar observations when to expect an eclipse, they could then calculate the resultant direction and violence of the tides. There is no longer any doubt about the advanced astronomical nature of these lunar observatory sites. What no one mentions is that women were the first observers of lunar cycles. As the first agriculturalists, women related moon phases to planting and reaping times. Even earlier, women watched the moon to know the optimal time to conceive, to abort, to give birth. It is women who live the lunar cycles in our bodies. Becoming and changing are the lunar order of things. The moon exerts an identical influence on the magnetic serpent currents in the earth, the tides of the sea, and women's menstrual flow. The lunar body is mirrored in nature and it synchronizes with the flow of menstrual blood. Lunar calendars. The first engraved rocks and stone tools yet found date from 300,000 BC. This was at the very beginning of Homo sapiens, during the early Neanderthal period in second interglacial Europe. These permanently marked stones are believed to be time markers, moon time markers, and were without doubt engraved by females. So early, as Thompson notes, the human is miniaturizing her universe into symbolic form. Thousands of similar pieces of stone and bone have been found, dating from the later Old Stone Age, circa 30,000 BC. These are marked with long and often complex sequences of notches and scratches, an elaboration of the earliest Neanderthal engraved stones. Many prehistorians have dismissed these marks as decorations. Does this sound familiar by now? By Alexander Marshak, an American archaeological writer, decided to study these marks systematically under a microscope. He found the signs to be deliberately made, the tiny grooves cut in differing depths, widths, and shapes. Scratches on one pebble or bone were made with differently shaped tools. Marshak concluded that the marker changed to a new tool, often cutting at a new angle, with each change of moon phase. One piece of bone records 6 months on one side, 6 months on the other side. This system had been undergoing refinement since the Neanderthal engraved rocks of 300,000 BC. It was a complicated notation for recording factual data, timekeeping, phase, and cycle marking. It was in use in Europe tens, indeed hundreds of thousands of years before what is called true writing appeared in the Near East sometime in the late 4th millennium BC. This notation and the lunar calendar it recorded was the invention of women. Marshak has studied another form of timekeeping, the lunar calendar stick. Originally perhaps carved from bone, later of wood, the sticks were an elaborate record of the lunar year. One such calendar stick that Marshak spotted in an 1828 portrait of a Winnebago chief was 53 inches long with 4 sides or faces. Vertical marks are etched into it at regular intervals. Above them are small crescents and dots. These sticks were complex lunar tally sticks that marked the lunar year, brought the lunar year into phase with the solar year, and noted the times of rituals. So far, Marshak has found at least 5 calendar sticks from 3 different Native American tribes. Such sticks appear in Paleolithic cave paintings dating from 50,000 BC. They are held by women and shamans. and later became the magician's wand. Abbe Bruel named this stick Le Baton de Commandement, suggesting it was an insignia of male rulership or power. But in fact, as a lunar measuring instrument, the stick derives from women's earliest moon phase engravings on rock and stone. In Thompson's words, the owner of the baton is not man the mighty hunter, but the midwife. The midwife, of course, because it was her job and the job of every pregnant woman to know exactly when babies were due. Anthropologists have described the keeping of lunar calendars, specifically by women among Australian Aborigines, 6 Siberian tribes, and the Yurok Indians of North America. Australian women used notched sticks. Among the past and present day Siberians, Ganasans, Insis, Dolgans, Chuchai, Koryaks, and Kets. Pregnancy has the duration of exactly 10 lunar months, and it has always been women who kept the lunar calendars, marking those months off toward a safe full-term birth. Yurok women kept menstrual calendars and were certainly typical in this of other Native American women of both hemispheres. The Yurok count was kept by dropping a month. Stick each lunar month into a second basket until they reached a count of 10. With this method, they could predict births to within a day, a crucial accuracy among early hunting and gathering people on the move. The count was also useful in connection with abortion. As Thomas says, it is perfectly reasonable to assume that menstruation, lunar calendars, and midwifery are as much of or more at the foundation of human science than man, the great killer so celebrated by the macho anthropologists. And in fact, this does make sense, the kind of clear, simple sense that is so easily overlooked. The biblical idea that humanity began with a crime of disobedience is wrong. The capitalist Darwinian notion that human intellect begins with a clever act of self-interested murder and plunder and self-aggrandizement is wrong. The macho anthropological belief that human life and the human brain evolved through the inventions, discoveries, and experiences of the male hunter alone is all wrong. Human life begins with birth, and human culture and intelligence began with birth, with the female's experiences of surviving pregnancy and bearing children and keeping them alive. The possession by the Winnebago Indian chief of a lunar calendar stick as part of his insignia of power, along with an axe and a neck pendant, shows that this ruling power derives from the ancient time of female power. Thompson again points out that priests and shamans must always dress as women to take on woman's original magic, and that Aboriginal men worldwide were put through imitation childbirth and menstruation rituals for purposes of initiation. The fact that the baton was taken over by men in the militarist cultures of patriarchal civilization may, in fact, indicate that they took it over because it was a most ancient symbol of feminine power. So, at the very beginning of the Upper Paleolithic, women, Neanderthal women, apparently knew that lunar periods were of a certain length, were repeated regularly, and that the phases were roughly predictable within a day or two. Cro-Magnon women in 30,000 BC had formed a conception of a lunar year and were working out a lunar calendar. By the end of the Paleolithic age, circa 10,000 BC, they could predict the seasons of the year, the phases of the moon, the annual migrations of animals, birds, and fish. When Neolithic people settled in village sites, they began building their calendars, stone circles that were to be used for lunar and solar observations, as well as religious ceremonies. Or perhaps it was the other way around. Perhaps the ceremonial observatories, these power centers formed or fixed points of stone, were the loci that gave rise to the settled farming communities that replaced the nomadic food gatherers and hunters. It is not far-fetched to think women invented symbolic and abstract notation, observational science, and early mathematics. Early women's thought processes, early man's too, were still organic, still rooted in nature and practical experience, not alienated or born of a desire to conquer nature. Organic rational thought emerged from a desire to cooperate with the natural world and from a real integral observance of the needs and rhythms of the personal self and the human community. It also emerged from a mind free of the inhibitions, blocks, and dogmas imposed by later patriarchal religions and cultures. The implications of this association of women and the moon would suggest that women were the first observers of the basic periodicity of nature, the periodicity upon which all later scientific observations were made. Woman was the first to note a correspondence between an internal process she was going through and an external process in nature. She is the one who constructs a more holistic epistemology in which subject and object are in sympathetic resonance with the other, with one another. She is the holistic scientist who constructs a taxonomy for all the beneficial herbs and plants. She is the one who knows the secrets of the time of their flowering. The worldview that separates the observer from the system he observes, that imagines that the universe can be split into mere subjectivity and real objectivity, is not of her doing. She expresses the witness of the body that Whitehead tried to rediscover in his philosophy of organism and process. Here is the philosophy that stood before the speculations and of the pre-Socratics. She is the Holy Mother Church, which Descartes challenged when he cut the umbilical cord between philosophy and the church and split reality into the res extensa and the res cogitans. The reason the Venus of La Salle or the modern Virgin of Guadalupe are pictured with the crescent moon is that woman and the moon are a single mystery. The mystery is and was a reality, and all original real mystery was observed, studied, pondered, and participated in by original real human beings. Mystery was not used as a tool of fear or oppression, of obfuscation and power, but was used gratefully as ceremonial food by the evolving human intelligence led by the observational intelligence of women. In the Woman's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets, Barbara G. Walker reminds us that Mathesis means mother wisdom and originally referred to divination by the stars. Worldwide, in ancient and modern languages, the word Ma means mother. The first astrologers and mathematicians, meaning learned mothers, were women. The Lunda people of African Angola tell of a girl who discovered a method for measuring long distances in boundary disputes. In her daily task, she wove wickerwork doors for huts from leather strips, measuring them a thumbnail wide. She noticed that an ox hide could be cut into a continuous strip to cover a great distance, and that all ox hides produced strips of similar length. So she suggested the strips be used as standard units of measurement by her tribe. Certainly, measuring amounts of stored food and estimating how much could be used on a daily basis to feed a certain number of people through the lean months of the agricultural year gave Neolithic women profound experience in mathematical calculation. Life depended on it. Geometry and the human image were originally two expressions of the same divine image, the body of the universe. Number emerged from sensory matter. To the ancients, number was always founded in real and concrete human experience and did not possess abstract universality or objectivity. The megalithic yard of the stone monument builders was 2.72 feet, the measurement of the human stride. Throughout classic antiquity, measurements were based primarily on parts of the human body, like the foot, the hand span, or the finger joint. The Chinese word for mathematics, suan, is no older than Confucius, circa 600 BC. Units of linear measure were codified into abstractions gradually, a process perhaps begun in Babylon circa 2500 BC. In Western artistic creation, we have inherited a tradition of ideal forms and measurements that uses a numerical system exploited during the European Renaissance. This tradition can be traced back to Pythagoras, circa 550 BC, who developed a kind of mathematical mysticism out of megalithic philosophy. He acquired his knowledge and perhaps his methods also from Thracian wise women. Pythagoras, like mathematicians after him, came to believe that mathematics is not just a language describing nature, but is inherent in nature. All things are numbers. Numbers are the first principle, indeed, the very elements of the things of nature. Thus, for the Western world, a description was abstracted from substance and deified into an objective system. Thus, Pythagoras introduced logical reasoning rather than organic reasoning into the domain of religion and ritual, laying the foundations for the later intellectual theology of Christian scholars and the Western world in general. This combination of mathematics and theology characterizes religious philosophy in classical Greece, in medieval Europe, in Reformation and modern times. Consequently, God was no longer intuition or ecstatic vision, not profound ontological experience, but a kind of rational machine explained by a few scholarly men. Plato, St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Descartes all inherited this numerical philosophy and shared a logical admiration of the timeless and static, utterly transcendent and aloof, pure spirit of the Father God. Utterly abstracted from flesh and earthly cyclicity, this Father God was an unappealable as pure number. Pure number is Pure number is always elevated above the messy world of mere life. During 300 years of witch hunts in Europe, this rationalistic theology was used as a legal and clerical weapon against what still remained of the ancient women cultures. Medieval scholars not only debated endlessly and in dead earnest about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. During obscene torture, priests and civil judges also hounded their female victim with obsessive questions about the precise number of imps she employed, the total number of times she had intercourse with the devil, the exact size and length of his member, and so forth. The dogmatic insistence on number was supposed to cast an aura of rationality and objectivity around their otherwise bizarre and sick proceedings. In modern forms like psychological measurements, behavioral norms, notions of quantifiable sanity, and adjustment, deified number is still used as a power tool against quote unquote social deviance. Moonbirds, 1978. In contrast, Eastern mysticism, like Europe pagan orientation and primal orientation everywhere, understands mathematics as one part of our conceptual map, a means of apprehending one part of reality, but not an abstractive feature of reality itself. Reality is undifferentiated, constantly moving and cyclic, like the moon. Moon mines. The slightly bulging equatorial region of our globe is closer to the moon than other parts of the earth. Probably for this reason, women who live near the equator tend to ovulate during the full moon. Because of the phenomenon of menstrual synchrony, in which women living together tend to have their periods at the same time, a synchronous full moon ovulation would mean a synchronous menstruation near the dark of the moon. And mythology has, in fact, always associated the two. Women living together in small gathering and hunting bands in the equatorial regions would have their bleeding times together at the same time of the month, when the moon was dark and the earth devoid. Oops, sorry. The earth devoid of her light. Our human ancestors lived for millions of years in the equatorial Africa, and perhaps this means that human consciousness began evolving in synchrony with this powerful observed fact of all females bleeding together, bleeding mysteriously in time with the mysterious disappearance of the moon. Among early women, no one experienced menstruation in private. It was not a personal phenomenon, but an awesome datum of the female group. Group initiation rites were held when the young girls reached puberty. This is still true among all Aboriginal people worldwide, whose customs have not been totally suppressed by Christian patriarchy. Originally, female puberty rites of first menstruation were not meant to punish girls with shame for the crime of becoming women or to restrict their new lives as women in any punitive way. The rites were a celebration of female power and an initiation of the young girl into the wise and careful use of that power for the benefit of all. The first menstruation was a transition into partaking of the nature of the cosmic mother and of her full face, the moon. Women's monthly cycle being seen as the same duration as the moon cycle, and women's bleeding synchronous actually or legendarily with the dark moon. It was easy to believe that the moon mother was bleeding also. The witches' Sabbaths were originally observances of the sacred or taboo days at the new and full moon. Critical days of her cycle, days and nights of great power for good or for harm. Women originally went into minstrel huts in order to gather the dark moon power, to focus it and study it in solitude. In both group and solitary meditation, moon power became mind power. In most languages, there is a common root word for moon and menstruation. Our own word for menstruation comes from menses, the Latin word for month, which was measured originally by the moon. And both words are related through Indo-European roots to the Old English word mona, or moon, deriving from me, which meant both mind and measurement. All are cognates: moon, mind, measurement, month, menstruation, since it is the moon mind that establishes measurement, including calendars. This cluster of meanings can also be found in the Egyptian moon god, who was worshipped as the creator of the alphabet, the art of writing, literature, numbers, counting, and wisdom. Though the Egyptian moon god was male, he was seen as the lover of the goddess and thus assigned her attributes. Menstruation also means moon change, also mind change. The mother was seen to rest at full moon when she was neither waxing nor waning. Sabbat means heart rest. The witches' Sabbaths were first held once a month, but later at each quarter of the moon. All witches' celebrations, all pagan rituals were acts of cognizing a revolving process, change within continuity, continuity within change, around and around forever. Pregnancy, as well as menstruation, was believed to be caused by the moon. Menstruation came from the new moon or dark moon, while the full moon impregnated, a folk belief that correlates very well with the fact of equatorial ovulation during the full moon. Many mythological and folk heroes and religious founders were supposedly conceived by the moon, including the Buddha and Jesus, when we think about it, whose mother still stands on her moon. Physically, the moon exerts a gravitational pull, which, combined with that of the sun, deforms the Earth's surface by as much as a foot. The surface of the ocean is pulled into a bulge measuring several feet, causing the tides. Recent studies have shown, however, that it is the light of the moon, perhaps even more than its gravitational pull, that influences reproductive behavior in organisms. Like most animals and plants, humans evolved in a light and dark world, day and night alternating regularly. But periodically, the night is not dark around the time of the full moon. Perhaps the human species evolved a genetic response to moonlight if all early women ovulated at the full moon. Light is a potent trigger of biological rhythms, and it is not an impossibility that artificial light has affected our body rhythms. There is never real darkness in a city, destroying our ancient understanding of our menstrual month, moon periodicity, perhaps destroying also our knowledge of natural contraception, as suggested provocatively by Louise Lacey in her book Lunaception. The power of fertility in plants as well as in humans was seen to emanate from the moon. Many people still hold the ancient belief that plants grow mostly at night under the polarized moonlight. Agriculture began in very warm Near Eastern climates where the sun can be a force hostile to life, scorching young shoots, burning leaves and the soil into arid dust. Plutarch, in his Isis and Osiris, argued that the moon, with her humid and generative light, is favorable to the propagation of animals and the growth of plants, while the sun, with his fierce fire, scorches and burns up all growing things, renders the greater part of the earth uninhabitable by reason of his blaze, and often overpowers the moon herself. In such lands, summer with its unrelenting heart was conceived as a return to chaos, the end of the world through heat and fire. Early people saw the sun as the lesser fruit of the mother sky. It was female night with her cool moisture and magical moonlight that gave life and fertility. In the cold north, though, where the sun is benevolent and welcome, the sun was seen as a mother goddess. Perhaps this was so for the Celts. Ancient people knew that a child is not only the product of human sex, children are also the offspring of the spirit joined with the astrological influences existing at its conception and birth. Earth was considered to be the home of children before they were born. In Africa and Australia, for example, souls waiting to be born were believed to live under the earth or in rocks. Unborn children lived in fountains, springs, lakes, and streams, or in trees, bushes, and flowers, waiting to be born as human beings through the joined energies of the earth and moon. Festivals dedicated to the goddess were the favorite times to conceive children. The moon's monthly waxing was beneficial to an infant's growth, and there were baptism rites where the baby was exposed to the moon, sun, and earth, incorporating the newborn within this celestial sphere or family. In this way, both Bantu Africans and Native Americans linked the social, biological, and spiritual worlds. Among people for whom sex does not imply impurity or hold magical religious danger, the taboo on the sexual act does not occur in relation to ceremonies. Rather, ceremonial sex was always a powerful act leading to spiritual perfection. Within the stone circles of the Neolithic, perhaps the entire human community celebrated the creative power of the goddess in festivals coinciding with those magic times, with the energy tides of the unseen flowed strongly around and through the earth. Earth channels were then wide open to receive her spirit, giving enhanced consciousness, healing, and fertility to the people. These are the ceremonies that have been so condescendingly labeled fertility rites by prurient patriarchal anthropologists and satanic orgies by the missionaries. And what were those children like who were born with the blessings of both the moon mother and their human mothers? Were their psyches wide open, communicating easily with the greater self? Was the psychic astral lunar body more vibrant and aware? Were they able to communicate and resonate with the animals and plants? the stones, and whole earth, and also tune into cosmic vibrations of moon, sun, and stars. What were moon minds alike? What were moon minds like? The vast silence of dark space, lit by the clarity of the moon and stars, became a metaphor for deep thought and creative vision. The moon goddess was the judge and giver of law. Crimes, challenges, problems were investigated by the women by moonlight. Bright nights were spent sitting around the fire, thinking, contemplating, envisioning. This is why words that have to do with mental activity are in most languages cognate with names for the moon. Mens, mental, measure, month, mind. They call the moon the mother of the universe, having both female and male powers and reproducing herself alone. Sowing and reaping were reckoned by the moon, sowing at the new moon and reaping at the old. All agricultural proceedings had to be timed with the moon's changes. Planting, cultivating, and harvesting were originally women's work, since only women are under the direct guardianship of the moon mother. Many agricultural people still believe that only women can make things grow. Water, like fire, was anciently sacred and specially related to the moon mother. Rainmaking and magic control of the weather were secret rites performed by naked women not to be seen by men. Witches have the same custom still, and it was traditionally said of them that tender girls of 8 to 10 years can raise up rain and tempests. In recent studies of psychic phenomena made in Russia, it was found that dowsing rods work twice as accurately in the hands of women than in those of men. More dramatically, the dowsing rod always responds to the polarity of women's bodies, no matter from what direction the body is approached. This is not the case with men's bodies. Since the tides are regulated by the moon's mother's cycles, she was believed to give all moisture from the morning dew, natural springs, and rain to the great rivers and oceans. The moon queen was the tribe's rainmaker. The moon also controls the fluids of the human body, and the brain, as the moistest part of all, was particularly subject to its influences. Words like lunacy and moon madness show negative traces of this belief. In the Stone Age caves, there had been darkness and seemingly changeless stability, following wild game and gathering wild plants. Paleolithic people lived in dream time. Perhaps movement in time was not intellectually experienced as we do until reaping of wild grain was replaced by the punctual observance of seed time and harvest time, the development of a calendric time sense. Seasonal inundation of land helped mark these planting and harvesting periods. Shepherds learned to reckon the periods of river height increase by watching the moon's phases cross the higher pathway of the stars. Out of primordial dream time emerged this new and revolutionary conception of seasonal advance and regression, the complex interplay of opposing forces and their regularity. Until recently, duration of time was reckoned by nights rather than days. This can still be seen in time words like fortnight, honeymoon, month, or moon. Originally, the month was a triplicity, like the moon's cycle, waxing, full, and waning. The month was divided into 3 periods of 10 days each, and this division is retained in the astrological division of a zodiacal month into 3 decans. The first of each month fell on the night when the lunar crescent appeared. The crescent of the waxing moon came to symbolize increasing power and was later adopted as the emblem of Islam. For this reason, pre-Islamic Arabic people were all moon worshippers. Even the summer and winter solstices were calculated by the moon. The zodiacal constellations were called the houses of the moon, and the zodiacal belt was named the girdle of Ishtar. This Neolithic time calculation is quite different from that. Love you too. Is quite different from that of the Paleolithic cave peoples who reckoned cycles by the breeding seasons of animals. In the agricultural Neolithic, people developed a new consciousness of their own being in relation to the universe. This new consciousness is much closer to what we call modern. The understanding of numerical relations made it possible to make brick units from sun-dried mud, units of definite size and shape. The many industries developed by women, the wheeled transformation of matter brought about by women's discoveries and experiments with fire and water, led undoubtedly to increased activity of the logical mind. Just the notion of movement returning on itself, the building up of shape around emptiness, as in the making of a pot, so different from the carving of wood, bone, or stone, was an amazing feat of abstract thinking. A conception of cyclic symmetry developed, which in the end led to the invention of the wheel. There was a striking geometric tendency in Neolithic design, as in the repeated pattern of woven cloths and the repeated signs and symbols of pottery. This abstract and repetitive patterning was very different from the naturalistic animal and human forms of the old Stone Age cave cultures, and it had its dangers. With the development of the pottery wheel, as has been said, in many cultures, men took over ceramics entirely and began the mass production of items that had once been very lovingly handcrafted for local use. What kept this Neolithic intellectual development still within the matriarchal context was that all magic symbols, the lunar calendar, the daily industries occurred within a ritual, religious framework belonging to the goddess and the human collective. Techniques and signs were not to be manipulated for personal profit or exploited for personal power until the full establishment of patriarchy in the Bronze Age or late Neolithic. Moon Mother. The earliest representations of the Moon Mother, and perhaps the most universal, were in the form of a cone or pillar of stone. This is the column on which the death and life goddess perches, the anointed one. The stones themselves were considered sacred. Sometimes they were meteoric, whatever, and they were anointed by having ritual oil, blood, or fermented liquor poured over them. The great Semitic moon goddess Astarte was worshipped on Mount Sinai by the Canaanites in the form of a stone pillar, long before Moses received the stone tablets of the law there. Mount Sinai, in fact, means mountain of the moon. And it is interesting to note that the Hebrew Levite priests were originally serpent priests, Levi, the great serpent, as in Leviathan. There is a close resemblance among moon mothers everywhere. In this form, the great goddess is always the lawgiver, the orderer of time, the judge of the dead, and the eternal source of wisdom and ecstasy. She was Ishtar of Babylon long before 3000 BC, as the Hindu moon mother Kali sits in her lotus posture, breathing the rise and fall of our earthly tides. The Irish goddess Cailleach, or pronounced Kali, sits in her lotus position also and does the same. Even Mary of the Catholic Church is called the moon and is turned to by women in childbirth, as was her original Diana Artemis Astarte. In her form of the great whale dragon, Babylonian Tiamat, Hebrew Leviathan, Ishtar brought about the great flood, an earthly disaster story the Hebrews borrowed from Sumerian and Babylonian accounts. But Ishtar also lamented her drowned children, comparing them to fishes in the sea. And it is always in the form of the great serpent or dragon or sea monster that the moon mother was slain by later patriarchal heroes, as Tiamat, Tehomet, or Vitri of the Vedas, the Gorgon Medusa, the dragon slain by St. George, or the snakes driven from Ireland by St. Patrick. In fact, there never were any or many snakes in Ireland. The Christian saint symbolically killed a female quote unquote fiend in serpentine or dragon form, whose Irish name was Coorthanach or Cora, called the devil's mother by the Pious. The threefold goddess of Arabia, Magna Dea, was enshrined in the sacred black stone, the Kaaba at Mecca, where she was served in ancient times by her priestesses. The sacred black stone at Mecca, site of so many pilgrimages, is imprinted with her vulva/yoni sign and covered with a black pall called the skirt of Kaaba. The male priests who serve her today are called Benai Sheba, which means the sons of the old woman or the moon. Present day Muslim pilgrims to this shrine, the most holy place of all Islam, are mostly unaware of the pre-Islamic significance of the Kaaba. They circle the black stone 7 times to attain the summit by spiraling around it. 7 is the number of the moon, and the ancients always danced the way in spiral processions to the summits of her earth mounds. Moon shrines and sanctuaries were situated in forests, in caves, and on mountaintops, and by lakes, sacred springs, and wells that were also healing centers. Priestesses guarded the water supplies as well as the sacred fires. This was true in even Roman times, where the priestesses were called Vestal Virgins. Water springs originating deep in the earth were believed to have magic and healing powers, and fire was the fertilizing power of the moon, the sacred flame representing the moon's light. Torches, candies, and bonfires were burnt to help the moon's fertilizing light shining. The bonfires, torch processions, and candle burning at Christmas time originated in these fire rituals of the goddess. On December 13th in Sweden, St. Lucia travels in procession as the Queen of Light, with a crown of candles in her hair, surrounded by her maidens. Even now, and of course, the evergreen tree, the gift exchange, and the midwinter festivals of Christmas all derive from ancient pagan midwinter rituals of the goddess. Photo: Earth is our mother with Nordic mother goddess, 1984. St. Lucia of Sweden on December 13th, the festival of the great Hecate on August 13th. 13 members in a witch coven. Is the number 13 seen as unlucky because of its association with matriarchal religion? Among pagan Scandinavians, Friday the 13th was celebrated as a beneficent day. Friday is Freya or Frigga's day, the great goddess of the north, and 13 is the number of lunar months in a year. Many patriarchal bad omens are simply reversals of what was sacred to matriarchy and the goddess religion. The left-hand path in patriarchal religion is called the path of evil, of woman, of black magic. The left side of the body, where the heart beats, was considered by the ancients to be the seat of divine feminine power. All life comes from her heart. The word sinister, which originally meant left, has come to mean everything suspicious, evil, ominous, while dextra, meaning in Latin right or right-handedness, has acquired wonderful meanings like skillful, mentally clever, and correct. In Europe, an illegitimate child was long signified as bar sinister, meaning child of the left side or the mother's side. The right-hand path is supposed to be the path of goodness or of white magic, and children are encouraged to favor the right hand, the hand of righteousness. In Christian imagery, the good sheep sit on God's right hand in heaven while the bad goats go to the left. That these connotations remain with us in modern politics is not accidental. The right is father Phacetic, the left is mother communal. Ancient moon priestesses were called virgins. Virgin meant not married, not belonging to a man, a woman who was one in herself. The very word derives from a Latin root meaning strength, force, skill, and was later applied to men, virile. Ishtar, Diana, Astarte, Isis were all called virgin, which did not refer to sexual chastity, but sexual independence. And all great culture heroes of the past, mythic or historic, were said to be born of virgin mothers. Marduk, Gilgamesh, Buddha, Osiris, Dionysus, Genghis Khan, Jesus. They were all affirmed as sons of the Great Mother, of the original one, their worldly power deriving from her. When the Hebrews used the word, and in the original Aramaic, it meant maiden or young woman, with no connotations of sexual chastity. But later Christian translators could not conceive of the Virgin Mary as a woman of independent sexuality. Needless to say, they distorted the meaning into sexually pure, chaste, or never touched. When Joan of Arc, with her witch coven associations, was called La Pucelle, the maiden, the virgin, the world retained some of its original pagan sense of a strong and independent woman. The goddess in her garden with tree, serpent, and her son slash lover, the green man of vegetation, 1971. The moon goddess was worshipped in orgiastic rites, being the divinity of matriarchal women, free to take as many lovers as they chose. Women could surrender themselves to the goddess by making love to a stranger in her temple. Pause. This has been called by male historians sacred prostitution, but the word is totally misleading. Sure. This was not any kind of service to men, nor did any woman have to do this to live. It was a way for women to participate for a ritual moment in the trans individual being of the goddess. The goddess comes into being in the moment of union, a moment of psychic as well as sexual union. This was one way that men could partake in her essence also, through the body of a woman. The rite was meant to recharge the living goddess and to enlarge the woman's ego consciousness into an experience of cosmic sexual power and flow. It was a way for each woman to experience herself as the moon. Persephone and Demeter within Newgrange, 1982. The cow goddess and new foods. In the Neolithic religions of both Egypt and Mesopotamia, as G. Rachel Levi noted, the horned cow appears with a significance going back to the Old Stone Age. For the cow heads of the Sumerian Copper Age, like the sacred calf of Egypt, had a triangle between the horns inlaid in mother of pearl. That Paleolithic female triangle later stood as an upright cone or little mountain between the horns of Syrian altars. In both Egypt and Mesopotamia, also, the symbolic attribute of the goddess of birth was the bicornate uterus of a heifer, or the cow head horns were echoed in the homed cow womb. Even more wide ranging throughout Asia and Africa, the moon goddess wore the cow's horns, the same horns that appear in later Europe on the helmets of Teutonic heroines. She was the cosmic cow who produced galactic milk, human milk, and the new foods, and who ruled over the sacred herds. She who gives you blessings from heaven above and from the abyss below, blessings of mother life. Her gifts were seen to pour from the sky, from the dark abyss of the unknown, and from humanity. I have breasts, therefore I am, says the Great Mother. These are her words carved in a stone inscription from dynastic Egypt. She was the goddess of the pasture, and the sacred queen or king was ritually nourished from her milk. She was also the enclosure that protected the calves. I am the fold, he the lamb. She was the gate of the enclosure as well as the winged and horned gate of the temple. She was the gate of the dolmen womb, two stone pillars with a transverse stone resting over them as a kind of ritual doorway. Entrance and threshold rites were always performed to her. The enclosure, the gate, the door, the pillars of the temple, all these were her body and were thought to have magic and healing powers. Wild goats were probably the first animals to be systematically domesticated, as they were native to the areas where the first Neolithic cultures seem to have originated. Human children have been suckled by she goats, whose milk is very similar in consistency to human mother's milk. In the myths and folklore of many people are tales of human babes reared by animal mothers. A Spanish legend says that the Milky Way of the stars is really milk dripping from the udder of a fabulous goat. The galaxy is indeed her milky circle. Women domesticated by Women domesticated many animals, and surely women who can produce milk from our own breasts were the first to think of using milk from goats and cows as human foods. These new foods meant an increase in nourishment and so a great advance in human practical and cultural development. Remember the clay reliefs of women's breasts surmounted by cows' horns on the temple walls of ChayaFyah. Those matriarchal people were vegetarians living on milk and honey, suggesting that their cows were venerated for their milk but not slaughtered for their meat. In matriarchal Crete, every cow was known by her personal name, but it seems that bull calves who were unproductive were ritually killed and eaten. This could be the origin of the religious sacrifice or of the sacred bull, son of the cow mother, his annual death and resurrection being a widespread celebration throughout the Mediterranean and northern Africa. Surely the veneration of cattle among East African peoples to this day is a remnant of the widespread Neolithic mother cow and bull worship. Though cattle herds have now become a symbol of specifically male wealth, especially in East Africa and Asia, still even today on farms in many countries, it is women's work to milk and tend the cows, and money from milk sales belongs to the women. In matrifocal cultures, the human communities lived in harmony with nature's ecosystems. With the introduction of settled farming came a serious danger of upsetting the balance that nomadic food gatherers and hunters had maintained with the environment. The women farmers and gardeners of the Neolithic had to learn to cooperate with the earth through crop rotation. They learned to fertilize fields with human and animal excrement, where human excrement has been widely used to fertilize soil, as until recently in China, people build up resistance to its bacteria. In the Neolithic, at the origin of agriculture, everything went back to nature in an eternal cycle. In a natural ecosystem, one dead organism becomes energy for another life, and the cultivated fields and farmlands develop their own ecocycles. In Indonesia, for example, up to 40 different kinds of plants will grow in the same fields. Vegetable bushes, root vegetables, beans, herbs, fruit trees, and so forth. People develop these wise systems for a simple reason. They are living directly with the earth's capacity for survival, not for profit. With patriarchy, however, with male-dominated farming and animal husbandry, the plants, animals, and soils began to be forced to produce beyond their natural capacities. In the beginning of patriarchy, profit was in the form of ego and power, ownership of large herds, domination of agricultural space and labor. Even before money was introduced, this kind of personal profit system took precedence over the natural balance of the ecosystem. Healthy cycles were ignored and destroyed. With the growth of cities and large landless urban populations, more people had to be fed with less respect paid to the land. Finally, with advanced technology, farming became a business industry and specialized monoculture methods were introduced. Growing just one kind of plant like wheat on vast areas is more immediately profitable, saving machinery and human labor in the short run. But in the long run, with the same crop year after year in the same fields, the soil is exhausted. Insects also multiply in monocultures, and chemical pesticides become a global business introduced to kill pests violently, but they also kill off the birds, who are the natural insect eaters, and the bees. And over longer spans, they kill the workers. Without bees, the fruit trees and other plants are not pollinated, and so it goes. Nature works in coordinated cycles, and when a harmonious cycle is destroyed, a cycle of destruction will take its place. Because patriarchal men have refused to cooperate with nature, following religions and secular ideologies based on defiance and contempt for the earth, they have now almost destroyed our chances of survival on earth. It took 1,500 million years for the first living organisms to change the atmosphere so that animal life could begin to be possible. But patriarchy has destroyed so much in relatively no time at all, roughly in 2,000 years. At increasing speeds today, forests are cut down, water is poisoned, the air polluted, the soil ruined. The point is that such devastation could happen only by way of male dominated religions and cultural ideologies based on hostility toward the Earth's cyclic processes. For at least 500,000 years, human beings survived as pagans, not because they were savage and stupid, as the missionaries of all patriarchal religions would have us believe, but because pagan means of the land. It it is a spiritual orientation that linked people, body, mind, and soul with the intelligence of the earth. In contrast, patriarchy assumes that the earth is stupid and proceeds to replace her ways with man made ways. With what result? The European Black Death in the 14th century is now thought to have been caused or exacerbated by wanton tree cutting all over England. The rats and mice who normally lived in the forests could no longer survive there with so many trees decimated. They invaded the cities, infecting urban house rats with plague bacteria. Fleas become carriers and spread bubonic and pneumonic plague bacteria to human beings, and nearly one-third of Europe's human population was destroyed. Pagan Europeans, Teutons, and Celts worshiped trees. Large number of trees were designated sacred, and there were penalties ranging from mild to severe for anyone cutting down a sacred tree. Anyone found cutting an oak, for instance, had his navel removed. His intestines were then pulled out and wrapped around the tree, his body thus roped to the tree with his own guts until he died. Was this savage, or was it a way of guaranteeing that no mortal could destroy the life and heritage of a whole people, a whole living world, for his own brief personal profit? If any of our pagan ancestors were to view the current decimation of entire forests with our permission to turn them into cardboard boxes and toothpicks, certainly they would think of us as something worse than savage. In AD 1000, African men accumulating larger and larger herds of cattle as symbols of personal wealth and status began to graze tame cattle on the savannah, where normally only wild animals had ranged, in balance with the region's fragile capacity. The cattle were male property. The more cattle, the more status. Women also were bought with cattle. But because these cattle were used only for their milk and blood and not slaughtered for meat, they multiplied rapidly, eating all the grass, and the savannah was turned into a desert. It takes 20 million tons of grain protein to feed cattle, which in turn give back only 2 million tons of protein in the form of meat. So all the land used to feed cattle is used inefficiently. This is a major cause of world famine today. Land that should be producing grain to feed many people are instead being used to feed cattle that will become food for a relative few. And the way 80% of American cattle are raised by the cattle industry, their excrement does not even return to fertilize the fields. Under patriarchal animal breeding, the animal mothers, cows, sows, hens are reduced to mechanical units of mass production in grotesque denial of their motherhood and the laws of healthy growth. Few people realize that cows have to be subjected to yearly pregnancies so that milk, cheese, and cream that form a substantial part of the diet of lacto-vegetarians and meat eaters, the majority of the population in the Western world, may be produced. Hardly any cows in the dairy herd are allowed to suckle their calves for more than 3 days, if at all. The calves are then reared by hand. Cattle are highly intelligent, and attachment between the calf and mother is particularly strong. The calves, the inevitable byproduct of these continuous pregnancies, if male, go to the slaughter almost immediately to be made into veal. The rennet used to make most commercial cheeses has to be taken from the stomach of a newly born calf, and 80% of the beef industry is a byproduct of the dairy industry. The modern dairy cow leads a life of hell and continuous childbirth, made painful by the cow's unnatural lifestyle and forced passivity, separation from her calf, pregnancies, and being milked all through the years. Poultry also is a force fed and force bred, and all meats artificially fattened with steroids. The mass antibiotics injected into the commercial animal feed also remain in the meat, leading to wide scale disruption of the helpful bacteria growth in the human intestine. Not to mention all the other chemicals, flavorings, preservatives, and color dyes pumped in to make something long dead seem freshly killed. If we are what we eat, then what are we when we eat foods produced in these ways? Okay, I'm going to end it there. Thank you all for listening. Next up will be the mother and daughter and rebirth. Like, share, and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Peace out.